Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. First off, let me say this commentary is probably going to make some folks upset. I was thinking about posting about it at least a week ago, but I had second thoughts. In fact, I had to wrestle with myself about whether or not to tackle this subject at all, no pun intended. It's a shame that I even have to, but the reason this is so problematic is because this deals with sports, one of the four subjects that a lot of black folks have trouble dealing with. I understand that some people have become invested in Deion Sanders, emotionally, psychologically, and I'm not here to say that you shouldn't root for him. And I'm also not saying that you should either. This morning's briefing is both all about Deion Sanders and at the same time, not. Deion Sanders is a celebrity, and that means his agenda is very different than ours. Nonetheless, we do live under a system of white supremacy, and that being the case, it is putridly, perversely normal that you have all sorts of racists who get predictably triggered by what they see his sudden rise in college sports as representing, which is them actually having to compete. But keep in mind, that's not exactly what I'm talking about. Now let's get the obvious out of the way. In the white media, sports reporting is a place where racist white commentators get to spew their anti-black racism, and they all get to pretend that, well, we're just criticizing a particular black athlete, or perhaps some black players, or just team culture. But you can tell by how consistently they use certain words, phrases, and criticisms that only apply to black athletes and never to white ones. It's all about race, not sports. So let's understand, sports is where the racists of all stripes feel that they can say what they really think about black people. Racists of every stripe, pattern, and spot feel that going to sporting events happens to be a place where they can go ahead and spew their racial epithets and their slurs at the black players, and that they hopefully, because they're in a crowd, they think that nobody's going to know that it's them, that they'll just be a face in the racist mob. Occasionally they do get called out, or sometimes even caught, but nothing much comes of it. This problem becomes greatly magnified when you consider that a lot of those racist spectators happen to be these university deans and sports directors. How can they tolerate all these failing college sports teams and still plow money into them? Because to them, that's a vanity project. There's a lot of psychological benefits that go along with them seeing a usually white coach barking out orders to black athletes, and they also get the sick, giddy pleasure of knowing that all these elite black athletes are working for free, and these white men who run these schools and the corporations like Electronic Arts and others get to make millions and even billions of dollars off of these black young men who don't get a dime. It's no accident that the movement to finally allow athletes to get paid for their efforts and the money they generate came from the West Coast and not, say, from the SEC, which are basically the states of the old Confederacy. So, of course, those racist reprobates are the main ones most determined to maintain the status quo. They don't like any of these changes that they see coming, and to them, Deion Sanders happens to be emblematic of those changes. It's no accident that Deion wanted to become a coach in Florida, but they turned him down. Clearly, Ron DeSantis isn't the only moron out there who will flush his career down the toilet just so that he can show his contempt for black people. No cure for stupid. Now, as everybody knows by now, Deion Sanders, in what amounts to basically only a few months, dismantled and tore down the entire University of Colorado's football program, including their entire roster, revolutionized all of it, brought in all new talent, and started from scratch. Typically, when you do that, it's going to take you a couple of years to get your legs under you and start to get things rolling. Deion Sanders hit the ground running immediately. And for a lot of these good old boy coaches and a lot of these good old boy athletic directors who only have their job because of racial privilege, this sets a frightening precedent. What it basically means is they're going to have to get a step faster, and a lot of them got their jobs not because they're good at it, but because of who they know. The same way that black athletes set a standard that most of their white counterparts were not able to meet, the fear has always been that if you let in too many black coaches, they will also set a standard that their white counterparts wouldn't be able to meet. There's a lot of good old boys who are seeing what's happening, and they don't like it. So, between the racist reporters in the white media, racist so-called fans, and of course these racist coaches and sports directors and university types, not to mention the corporations who have been getting away with murder, all of them getting paid huge money off of black athletes who got nothing at all, there's a lot of people who are terrified of the changes that they see brewing. That's something that needs to be said. It goes without saying that I understand exactly why a lot of people are gratified to see what's happening with Deion Sanders in the University of Colorado, and no matter what folks like myself think of black celebrities, there's a reality there that has to be acknowledged. Now, that brings us to the other part, and before we get to that, I know there's going to be a lot of people who are already storming the comments section to bombard me with messages saying, Professor Black Truth, you don't even watch sports, you don't even like sports, we know where this is going, why are you even talking? Well, that's because, as the white media has only been too eager to point out, the amount of attention that Coach Sanders has been getting right now has created a media sensation that transcends sports. And they're right. Now, I only vaguely remember Deion Sanders when he was in the NFL, and I totally forgot that he ever played baseball. But the one thing I do remember is that he was a shameless self-promoter, the operative term there being self. I'm sure that more than a few of you probably had a knee-jerk reaction to what I've said. I'm not here to bury Deion Sanders. I'm just saying I'm not going to be singing his praises. And if you say that Deion Sanders isn't obligated to be promoting anyone but himself, I agree. You're right. And I don't require him to do so. My problem is that the white media is trying to get black people to think that his current parade of self-promotion somehow has something to do with black people in general, or at the very least with black people in sports. And I'm telling you that you might want to think twice before you jump on that bandwagon. When talking about the Million Man March, Dr. John Henrik Clarke said, quote, "It is an accomplishment, but for whom and for what?" That's the question that ought to be asked about Coach Sanders and his success as the coach of the University of Colorado. Okay, so he scrapped the entire team except for his son, and he brought in dozens of newbies and guys that he knew from the NFL. And he's won his first few games. This is a turnaround story for the University of Colorado, and it's pretty much unprecedented in college sports. And if Sanders plays his cards right, he's going to have a lucrative second career as a football coach. That's fine. I got no problem with that. My question is, what does any of that have to do with anyone other than Deion Sanders? Perhaps I'm reading too much into this. Perhaps I'm having a knee-jerk reaction of my own. But looking at this from the outside, it smells to me like Jackie Robinson. The white media tries to make him out to be some sort of civil rights icon, but he wasn't. Jackie Robinson had far more in common with Charles Barkley than he would with, say, Muhammad Ali. To me, the white media's treatment of Sanders has more in common with Robinson than anyone else, and while there has been the to-be-expected griping and hating from the sidelines, the truth is that when you actually look at the white media's coverage of Coach Sanders, it's been in the main positive, believe it or not. As nice as it is to see the recipients of white privilege in the sports world quaking in their boots, we need to remember Deion Sanders is looking out for Deion Sanders. And before anyone has a knee-jerk reaction, actually listen to what it is that I'm saying. Deion Sanders is not trying to tear down anything. In fact, the changes that he's been making are things that the team owners have wanted for a while now, and that's faster results. There's something in it for them, but there's also something in it for him too. Now, he did make count it one mention that he's a black coach. That's fine, but I couldn't help but notice that Stephen Smith, of all people, was praising and defending him on exactly that basis, and when the original sports bootlick is boosting somebody, that's a warning sign to me. I've looked at this from a number of angles, but for me, there is no escaping that this looks and smells like a white media hype machine operation. Has there been criticism of Coach Sanders by figures in the white media? Of course there is. That's what they do. They criticize and tear down black people. The same whiners and wailers who criticize black people because it's a day that ends in a Y. The white media is going to be the white media no matter what. But I haven't seen this massive barrage of anti-Deion material that some people are saying that there is. A few of the usual career gripers, but nothing extraordinary. The coverage of him has actually been positive, not negative, in the main. The white media is actually boosting this guy. And there's more than a little part of me that wonders why that might be the case. You know who else the situation reminds me of? Barack Obama. I'm told to cheer for a man who never did anything for anyone but himself. And again, for the people who don't listen so well, I'm not saying that Coach Sanders is supposed to be doing anything for anyone other than himself. But I would advise everybody that taking care of Deion Sanders is what Deion Sanders is doing. Now, the talking points being pushed by certain black people that I see on ESPN, and yes, I do mean the usual suspects like Shannon Sharpe, Stephen Smith, and others, is that Deion Sanders' success as a coach will also help to elevate black coaches and the HBCUs, etc. Family, we should all beware whenever you got the white media presenting a narrative that one black person's success is going to revolutionize the condition of the entire group of black people. That's not how group change works. Now again, I know a lot of you are groaning and saying, Professor Truth, you don't even watch sports. Hell, you don't even like sports. So what do you know? Okay, well, here's a couple of sports stats for you. Doug Williams was the first black quarterback to win a Super Bowl back in 1988. So that victory on his part led to a massive influx of black quarterbacks, right? Wrong. Since Doug Williams' victory, rather than the floodgates opening and black quarterbacks being given an opportunity, instead what we saw was a massive white lash from these NFL team owners and administrators in the white media. For the last 35 years, there's only been a relative handful of black quarterbacks in the NFL, and one of them was Colin Kaepernick. I think we all know what happened to him. And it's only been just this year that there's finally been an appreciable increase in the number of black quarterbacks in the NFL. 35 years after Doug Williams won that Super Bowl. 3.5 decades later. But if past history is any indication, we can only wonder how long it'll be before the white media starts in with the predictable tsunami of articles saying that such and such black quarterback isn't cutting the grade. Oh, so-and-so isn't getting it done. Oh, so-and-so doesn't have a Super Bowl their very first season. And then they'll be saying, well, here's the problem. Secondly, there's been only a few black coaches too, despite the fact that in 2007 you had Lovie Smith and Tony Dungy, two black coaches whose teams faced off against each other at the Super Bowl. So that was the beginning of a huge influx of black coaches, right? Since we're talking about Coach Sanders, we can have this as part of the track record, right? I'm taking the talking points that we've been getting from the white media, given to us by people like Stephen Smith and Shannon Sharp, and I'm asking whether or not this actually pans out. Tony Dungy and Lovie Smith's Super Bowl in 2007 changed the game for black coaches, right? Of course not. Lovie Smith was fired from the Bears in 2012. Tony Dungy stepped down as coach the year after his Super Bowl appearance. When Smith and Dungy faced off against each other at the 2007 Super Bowl, the NFL only had 7 black coaches, a pathetically low number. But apparently even that was too high for the racists in the NFL, because today there's only 3 black coaches. So, in the 16 years since 2 black coaches took their teams to the Super Bowl, the number of black coaches in the NFL has been cut in half. And in the 35 years since Doug Williams showed that black quarterbacks can get it done rather than kick the door open, instead we see that the white owners of the NFL took the side of Jimmy the Greek. For those who don't know, Jimmy the Greek was a sports commentator who became infamous for a racist rant he went on, where he said, among other things, that black men dominated all their positions in football, and that if they let blacks be the quarterbacks, there wouldn't be any positions for the white players at all. Yes, it's true that there are white coaches, particularly in the SEC, the states of the old Confederacy, who are feeling like their days are numbered. But Coach Sanders isn't in control of the purse strings of his university. And when it comes to college kids getting those endorsement deals, NIL money or whatever, Coach Sanders isn't in charge of that either. And if the past history and the current racism of the white university administrators in America is any indication, it is far more likely that they'll take whatever they can glean from Deion's success, hand it off to some good old boys, and have them do their own half-brained version of it. Will their attempts to reverse engineer their own version of Deion Sanders' success work? Probably not, mainly because there were unique factors that went into what Deion Sanders did, and also because Deion Sanders does happen to be an original figure. I hardly believe that somebody like Nick Saban is going to be the next Deion Sanders, when he couldn't even be the last one. My point is that you got these good old boys who are the ones who write the rules that restrict what can be done regarding athletes. In other words, they're going to be writing rules tailor-made to try to prevent themselves from being run out for obsolescence, as they always do. Or they'll run to Congress and demand that Congress pass some legislation to help them keep their jobs, or to otherwise tilt the playing field back totally in their favor. Or most likely all of the above. They'll write rules at the collegiate level to favor themselves and go to Congress to limit what Deion and anyone else who tries to follow in his footsteps can do. They write rules all the time whenever black athletes do things that make the white ones look obsolete. Under white supremacy, they don't get judged based on performance. That's what white supremacy was meant to do, to insulate and protect certain people from having to compete. As Abe Lincoln said, I would see the superior position assigned to the white man. Look, we already know the racists are whining about Deion Sanders, and we all know why. My question is, are you jumping on a hype train without asking who the conductor is? Because when I look at the media coverage that Coach Sanders has been getting, it looks more than a little familiar to me, and I don't like how it looks. Deion Sanders' little statement about being a black coach means very little to me. It's like Barack Obama saying that if he had a son, he would have looked like Trayvon Martin. Barack Obama wasn't liked by the white powers that be, or much of white society in general, but so what? Controlled opposition is still controlled. Now, I fully understand that for a lot of you, this probably isn't the take on this whole matter that you would have wanted to hear from me. That's why I've been very careful with the words that I've chosen to use. I think this is a perspective that you need to hear because I'm looking forward into the future. Some of you are going to be trying to claim Professor Black Truth says that Deion Sanders' success is a bad thing for black people. Did I say it's a bad thing for black people? Of course not. What I'm trying to say is that if the past is any indication, his success isn't going to be benefiting anyone other than himself, and it's not by accident. Will Smith wasn't trying to elevate anyone other than himself and his son and his wife. Any of this sound familiar? I'm sure that more than a few of you bristled when I compared Deion Sanders to Barack Obama. You're probably saying that comparison's a little extreme, Professor Truth, and you know what? You probably got a point. Besides, as black people should know, Barack Obama made it a hallmark of his political career to stand in front of groups of black people, specifically black men, and start lecturing black men about pulling their pants up or about how some of these white society stereotypes and tropes are otherwise valid, repeating all this nonsense about black fathers need to take care of their kids. Something that he never did with non-black people at all, so at least there's that. Deion Sanders has never done like Obama and stood in front of a group of black men and lectured them about respecting women or reinforced any Me Too Time's Up black men are rape-happy sexual predators crap. At least he's never stood in front of a group of young black men telling them off with any of that nonsense. Because if he did, then perhaps that would be something that black folks need to consider when evaluating Coach Sanders. Look, white supremacy is sophisticated. It has to be. And only a fool, especially a group of people who have no power, don't have a healthy sense of suspicion whenever they see the white media presenting some black person to you and putting them on a pedestal. The white media has a multitude of ways to serve its anti-black masters. By getting the oppressed to act against their own interest. They're experts at getting black people to live vicariously. This is why too many of us are prone to allow actors, comedians, and entertainers to be our representatives on critical issues. And that includes athletes. And it's also how we allow people like Barack Obama to insult us to our faces and then make excuses for him. It's why they thought that Kamala Harris would be such an effective tool to shill for Biden, because they thought black women would try to live vicariously through her too. Living vicariously through black figures, whether they be in politics or entertainment, happens to be a dysfunction that black people have to free themselves from. And as for the alleged criticism of Deion Sanders, that's all part of the white media's technique as well. As Noam Chomsky said, it's the most sophisticated form of propaganda when something presents itself as opposition, when in reality, it's actually support. People like Agent Duvernay like to run around with shirts that say, "I am my ancestors' wildest dreams." Keep in mind, for the bootlick class, that means they dream of being part of the white power structure. To them, the goal isn't to tear down white power. The goal is to become part of it. There's a lot of people who watch sports and they love it and follow it religiously. They enjoy every aspect of it, and that's fine. It's endlessly fascinating for them. They understand how what happens in the sports world does spill over into society in general for a variety of reasons. And that's because, predictably, the racists don't draw a distinction between black athletes and the rest of the black community. We're all just one big nigger to them, and that's a fact. And it's also a fact that when you see black celebrities like, say, Dave Chappelle or Jada Pinkett talking about being black, they're talking about themselves specifically. That's what goes through their minds whenever they talk about black. I guess my point is that whatever you think of the Coach Sanders story, one thing we shouldn't be doing is getting carried away. Whatever initial hype and euphoria some people feel about him will eventually pass. It always has and always will. And as the years go by, we will all see exactly what the significance of Coach Sanders truly is. My point is that regardless, Deion Sanders should not be taken as an avatar for any of us. He's an entertainer, no different than the singers, actors, and athletes we see. That's what professional sports is. It's in the realm of entertainment. It's completely valid to point out that Coach Sanders' rise happens to have a whole bunch of white media critics angry and a whole bunch of good old boys in college sports fearing for their futures. They feel threatened by it. But keep in mind, we've seen this before. They control the universities and the companies that will monetize these college athletes, just like they do in the pros. This is the environment that Coach Sanders is in. That's the reality. And it's also a reality that he has a playbook of his own, one in which he's going to do everything he can to make sure that he and his son win, and that's fine. But I want people to recognize that's what's going on with him, and let's not read more into what he's doing than is actually there. Coach Sanders' rise is making a whole lot of the right people angry, and that's nice. I like Schadenfreude as much as the next person. But let's also remember that the entire reason Deion Sanders lasted as long as he did in the NFL and in Major League Baseball, and his short-lived career as a commentator, and actually being considered and eventually hired as a college coach, is precisely because for decades these white franchises and sports operations have been able to make a lot of money off of him. And that's what's still going on right now. And it's precisely those people at these white universities and white corporations who are the ones writing the paychecks. And clearly they feel completely confident that no matter what happens, Coach Sanders and his son can be counted on to play ball. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Mouse, Endoro, Richard Allen Lovell, Deborah Gallman, and Liban Gurhan. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.